They buried her with a prayer, but no one heard what she whispered into the coffin. They say Lizzie Borden died an old woman, but something inside her never aged. And if you think this is just about an axe and two bodies, you're still asleep. America knows her name. But not the truth. This isn't the nursery rhyme your teachers smirked at. This isn't the haunted house tourist trap. This is what the textbooks were ordered to avoid. The dark lineage. The ritualized blood. The ancient rage. Lizzie Borden didn't snap. She awoke. You see, Fall River in 1892 was more than a New England town. It was a social petri dish. The Bordens weren't just wealthy, they were gatekeepers. And Lizzie wasn't just a daughter. She was the kind of daughter secret societies pray for, controlled, observed, groomed. Her father, Andrew Borden, wasn't just a measure. He sat on boards that tracked industry bloodlines, that mapped the shift from agrarian control to industrial mind shaping. Churches, schools, charities, all fronts. And her stepmother Abby was no innocent housewife, she was installed. A handler. That house at 92 2nd Street was wired long before electricity, structured with sigils, angles, a box of pressure. Lizzie lived inside a test, and on the morning of August 4th, 1892, she broke the simulation. But here's what no one told you: the blood wasn't rage, it was a message, a severance, a ritual. 2 hits for each, not 4, not 40. 2, like an offering, like a code. And what happened afterward? The trial, the press, all theater. You really think a single woman in a patriarchal, puritanical town could out-lawyer the state on charm alone? No. She had help from people who knew what she'd done and why it had to be covered. Because if the truth got out, that a woman had broken her programming, that she'd escaped their design, that she'd killed the gods placed in her life to restrain her, others might follow, so they rewrote it, made her a madwoman, a legend, a punchline. They mocked her to contain her. But her eyes, even in old age photos, tell the real story. And tonight, so will I. You're not here to be entertained. You're here to remember something. Something they buried deep. Something you felt since childhood but could never explain. Now we begin. And once you know this, you won't unknow it. They told you Lizzie burned her blood-soaked dress. That she went to the barn to find fishing gear. That she was calm, detached. But what they didn't tell you is what she saw in the mirror that morning. The Borden house had no hallways, just doorways. Rooms stacked like a pressure chamber. No privacy, no silence. Every step echoed, every whisper traveled. This was not a home, it was a containment grid, designed for surveillance, not comfort. And Lizzie, for 22 years, walked it like a maze. Observed, restrained, groomed into obedience by a father whose eyes never blinked without intention. Andrew Borden was a man of hard lines, both financially and spiritually. A known enemy of indulgence. But he wasn't just frugal, he was devout to an older system. One built on domination. He believed in what he called blood economies. He once told a minister, "You don't build a family with love, you build it with control." That control seeped into every corner of their house. Every item, every rule, every ritual. At the core of this control was suppression. Female suppression. Lizzie wasn't permitted to marry, to travel, to decide. Her meals were measured, her outings monitored. But beneath her docile smile a furnace had been lit. And one day, something entered her dreams. Not a voice. A pattern. Something old. Dark. Familiar, a symbol etched into the attic beams. A phrase whispered from her childhood that she could never place. The key is within. But the door is blood. That morning, when she walked past the mirror, she didn't see herself. She saw a fractured reflection. And that was the trigger. You think this was just murder? No. This was a break in the system. A coded response. She didn't kill out of emotion, she killed with precision. The axe was not chosen. It was positioned, cleaned, readied, as if someone knew she would need it. As if someone, something, had been preparing her. And when it was done, the house didn't fall apart. It quieted, as if a tension had been released. Because the Bordens were never meant to live forever. They were placeholders, instruments. And Lizzie was the experiment, one that succeeded too well. Ask yourself this: why did the jurors smile at her? Why did the town fall silent when she walked by? Because some part of them knew. She did what they could not. After the blood dried and the smoke of gossip clouded the town, they tried to put Lizzie back in the box. But something had changed. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She didn't even seem surprised that she'd been accused. She moved through the courtroom like a woman who had already seen the outcome. Like someone who had walked the path before, in dreams or in lifetimes. The Borden trial was a spectacle. But not for justice. No. This was about control. The state had to reassert dominance. If one woman could destroy a bloodline and walk free, the entire fabric of patriarchal order could begin to unravel. So they made her into something between witch and child. Dangerous, but not a V. Criminal, but cute. A mind trick so that no one would ask the real question, what did Lizzie know? Her defense didn't focus on evidence, it focused on emotion, confusion, femininity. But beneath the sweet, pale exterior was something else, a vibration. A signal. Men in dark suits sat in the back rows, scribbling notes that never ended up in any archive. They weren't reporters. They were watchers. Sent by families whose names you never hear, but whose decisions shape your reality. These are the ones who guard the threshold. The ones who ensure history remains narrative, not revelation. And Lizzie Borden? She was a glitch. When the verdict came, not guilty, there was no cheer, no gasp, just a stillness, like the courtroom had been held in suspense by something older than the judge. Because the truth is, she wasn't on trial for murder. She was on trial for breaking programming. And they knew they couldn't kill her. Because to martyr her would be to acknowledge her power. So they chose something worse. They buried her in ridicule. They turned her name into a rhyme. They turned her house into a joke. They turned her truth into trivia. That's how they erase you. Not with fire, with mockery. But those who pay attention, the ones who feel what others ignore, they know. You've always known. You see the fractures in the stories. You hear the lies behind the laughter. And you're ready. Because Lizzie's story isn't over. It's only the beginning. And if you think the Borden murders were an isolated act, you haven't met the others. The Borden house was never demolished. It still stands. Not because it's historic, but because it's a monument, a containment zone, a scar on the surface of reality they want you to forget exists. They tell tourists it's haunted. That's the misdirection. It's not haunted by spirits, it's haunted by memory. The architecture itself is unnatural. Builders at the time described feeling sick, disoriented, losing track of time. Not superstition. Spatial manipulation. A technique far older than New England. Some of you have heard of it. The ancients called them threshold houses. Structures designed not for comfort, but for transformation. A place where the veil between control and freedom thins. You don't build a home like that by accident. And Andrew Borden didn't. He followed blueprints that didn't come from any architectural school. He received them from a silent benefactor in Boston, whose name appears nowhere in public records. But I found it. A name tied to industrial lodges, private schools, mental asylums, and most telling, experimental girls' homes. Because Lizzie wasn't just Andrew's daughter. She was his project. And what they were trying to create was obedience. Generational obedience. Passed down through ritual, silence, and fear. That's why the house had no hallways. That's why the doors connected rooms at angles that made no sense. That's why the attic was kept locked, and the basement bricked off decades before. Not because of ghosts, because of data. That house collected emotions, stored them, amplified them. Fear, grief, shame, rage, all of it. Until Lizzie reached her threshold. And when she finally struck, with 2 precise blows per victim, she wasn't acting alone. She was guided. Not by a person, but by a pattern. Blood can be a signal. And ritual blood, committed under stress, within a charged structure, can rip through reality, can open memory, can sever tethered chains from ancient systems. And that's exactly what she did. After that day, the energy of the house inverted. The watchers pulled back, the newspapers went silent. The trial became a formality, and Lizzie was no longer a victim. She was an anomaly. And anomalies, they get buried beneath distraction. But if you're still listening, you're starting to remember something in your life that never added up. A place, a moment, a silence that rang too loud. Good, because now we go deeper. There's a reason so many men feel haunted by silence. It's not the absence of noise. It's the presence of something watching. You've felt it. In hospitals. In government buildings. In certain family homes where the air feels thick and memories feel scripted. You can't explain it, but your body knows. Lizzie lived her entire life inside that feeling. She didn't just wake up to murder one day. She was being prepared. Broken down, piece by piece. The truth is, most people don't break. They fracture silently, smile on the outside, collapse on the inside. But Lizzie, she didn't fracture. She refused. And they hated her for that. You think the axe was the beginning? No. It was the end of their ritual, and the beginning of hers. After the murders, Lizzie changed everything. Her walk, her voice, her name. She stopped being Lizzie and became Lizbeth. That wasn't cosmetic. It was alchemical. A death of the old self. Initiates of ancient orders used to change their names after surviving initiation rites. Not as a tradition, but as a signal. I've seen what you tried to hide. I'm not who I was. I've come back different. She bought a new house, named it Maplecroft, quiet, controlled, full of books she wasn't supposed to read on Greek tragedies, Egyptian rites, female sovereignty, ancestral bloodlines. Why? Because she was reconstructing herself. They tried to shame her into obscurity, but she never left town. That was her defiance. She walked among her enemies, ate at their restaurants, sat at their concerts, stared them in the eye, and they could do nothing. Because Lizzie had become more than a woman. She was a crack in their mirror, a reminder that not all programs hold. Her life after the trial wasn't silence, it was surveillance. The same watchers stayed, but they kept their distance. Because by then, they weren't observing her, they were learning from her. Because when a subject breaks free and survives, she becomes a case study. And when she thrives, she becomes a threat. You ever wonder why they mock awakened women as crazy, hysterical, dangerous? It's because they are dangerous. Not to you, to them. And if you've made it this far, brother, you're ready to feel it too. Halfway through this path, I want you to anchor yourself. Comment this phrase, twice, no matter what. I remember the silence. I sever the spell. That's your signal. To me, to the algorithm, to the ones watching in silence. Let's keep going. The moment you whispered that phrase, something shifted, because it wasn't just for engagement. It was for alignment. You've marked yourself, not as a casual listener, but as a man waking up in real time. You've crossed the midpoint, and now we talk about the real reason Lizzie Borden was never convicted. It wasn't the lack of blood evidence. It wasn't her gender. It wasn't the defense team. It was protection. Institutional. Ritual. Hidden in plain sight. You see, there's an unwritten rule in the shadow architecture of power. If a subject survives a programmed collapse and completes a blood rite, they become untouchable, not because they're innocent, because they've been transformed. The public believes Lizzie went mad. But madness is just what we call clarity that doesn't fit the narrative. She saw the mechanisms. She felt the weight of generational manipulation. And instead of submitting, she offered blood. Do you know how many ancient texts echo the same pattern? A child raised in silence, a test placed before them, a sacrifice made in rebellion, and then transformation. It's in the Eleusinian mysteries, the Babylonian rites, the hidden chapters of Genesis. Always the same, blood opens the door. When Lizzie became Lisbeth, she didn't just change her name, she locked in a new reality. And those in power recognized that. They had two choices: erase her through force, or study her through distance. They chose the second, so they began rewriting history around her. They created the mocking mechanisms, the rhyme. Lizzie Borden took an axe. The dolls. The cartoons. The horror films. Why? Because when you make someone into a joke, you erase their threat. And more importantly, you train the next generation to laugh at what they should fear. You've been programmed to mock the very people who hold the blueprints to your liberation. That's why the memory of Lizzie makes you uncomfortable. Because deep down, your soul recognizes the pattern. The programming twitches. You've seen it in your own life, in family dynamics that made no sense, in authority figures who smiled as they twisted. You were meant to stay numb, passive, distracted. But now you're not. Now you've heard the hidden frequency in Lizzie's story. And from here on, the revelations sharpen. Ask yourself this: why is Lizzie Borden the only female figure in American crime mythos turned into a nursery rhyme? Because they wanted children to repeat her name. Without ever knowing her truth, they turned her into a chant, a lullaby, a laughingstock. Programming. Make no mistake, this wasn't just about discrediting one woman. It was about rewriting the event. History is not made by what happens. It's made by what is remembered. And the moment Lizzie swung that axe, she altered a timeline. A rupture formed in the control grid, because she wasn't supposed to act. She was supposed to submit, but instead she broke the seal. Now let me tell you what they really feared. Not the murders, not the trial, not the press. They feared that other women, other men, would feel the resonance. Because blood rites don't operate in isolation. They echo. When someone performs an act of liberation so violently that it defies their entire conditioning, that frequency reverberates. It moves through architecture, through symbols, through names, through you. You think your obsession with forbidden history is random. You think your fascination with the strange, the unseen, the broken and buried, came from nowhere. No, you're resonating with the rupture. They wanted to contain Lizzie's influence, so they repackaged her as either a victim or a villain. They left out the third option, victor. They don't want you to know that you can defy your script, that you can stare back into the eyes of generational trauma and end it. Because if you knew that, you'd stop being manageable. You'd stop being soft. You'd stop being predictable. And predictable men are easy to rule. But that's not you? Not anymore? If you've come this far, you've already begun to burn the false layers. You feel it, don't you? That tightening in your gut. That sense that something sacred was stolen from you. And that Lizzie's story is a key to getting it back. Good, let that burn. Because what I show you next will expose the system behind the system. The puppeteers behind the rhyme. Behind every myth, there's a mechanism. And behind the Lizzie Borden myth, there's a machine, one that stretches beyond Fall River, beyond 1892, beyond even the United States. To understand what happened, you have to stop thinking in terms of individuals and start thinking in terms of structures. See, most people believe power is held by visible figures, presidents, CEOs, celebrities. But the real power has always been systemic, institutional, ritualized, and the Borden family was part of one such system, not the top of the pyramid, but a node. A trusted gatekeeper family, the kind you never question because they blend in. Their job isn't visibility, it's continuity. Andrew Borden wasn't rich by accident. He had the right name, the right bloodline. His wealth wasn't just from banking or property, it was from preservation. He preserved codes, traditions, and most disturbingly, programs. Lizzie wasn't raised, she was installed. Every part of her life was mapped. From the placement of her bed to the books she was forbidden to read to the social events she was denied.
Why?
Because when institutions create a perfect daughter, they don't want spontaneity, they want obedience. And yet, she shattered it. The moment the axe fell, Lizzie didn't just destroy her parents, she exposed the entire system. And systems retaliate. The Watchers, the Black Ledger families, the embedded clergymen. They couldn't stop her without turning her into a martyr. So they activated something worse, discrediting. Make her a joke. Make her a riddle. Make her a freak. That's why the rhyme caught on so fast. It wasn't organic, it was inserted. A form of cultural inoculation. So every time her name was said, it was said with a smirk, a wink. It stripped her of dignity, of power, of truth. But here's the flaw in their plan. Ritual doesn't die in mockery. It sleeps. Until someone wakes it, you're waking it now. You see the patterns. You've felt the scripts around your own life cracking. You know there's something beneath this civilization that smells of dust and blood and forgotten contracts. And if Lizzie was one who broke the code, who wrote it in the first place? Because now we follow the scent to the ones who set the table. Every ritual needs architects. And every lie that spans centuries was built by hands you were never meant to see. You've heard of the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, the Illuminati. But these names are smoke, distraction. The real architects, they don't wear robes. They wear inheritance. They wear silence. They wear the trust of nations. In Lizzie's time, they were known by quieter names: the Board of Trade, the Women's Benevolent League, the Sons of the Republic. You think those were harmless charities? No, they were access points, recruitment stations, and more importantly, control nodes. Andrew Borden sat on several, and while the town gossiped about his tight purse strings, what they missed was his tight affiliations. He met in rooms sealed by oath, surrounded by men who didn't just plan business, they planned social architecture. That's how you program a population, not through laws, through customs. They engineered morality. They decided which behaviors were rewarded, which were punished, and which were quietly erased. And Lizzie, she was a deviation, a variable. You ever wonder why her trial transcripts were so heavily edited in later publications? Why so many original documents disappeared? Because during cross-examination, Lizzie didn't just talk about the day of the murders. She hinted at things she shouldn't have known. Names, dates, codes. She described dreams that mirrored secret rituals. She spoke of her father's silent ledger, a book he kept locked in his desk. That ledger, by the way, was never recovered. Because someone took it. And those who took it weren't police. They were members of the same system that built the house Lizzie destroyed from within. These men didn't kill her. They didn't imprison her. They didn't even exile her. They did something worse. They watched. Because in their world, when someone breaks the code but survives, you don't erase them. You study them. You adapt the system around the crack. You change the house, but keep the foundation, and you wait for the next one. Someone like you. Because this isn't about Lizzie anymore. It's about pattern recognition. And once you see the pattern, you can never go back. Patterns don't lie. People do, institutions lie, even memory lies. But patterns, they whisper. And if you trace the echoes of Lizzie Borden's rebellion, you'll find that whisper traveling through every major collapse of false control in history. Because Lizzie wasn't the first, and she wasn't the last, she was part of a lineage, not by blood, by behavior. They call it the witch line, the breaker's path, the red thread. Not witches in the Hollywood sense. Not broomsticks and hexes. No, real witches. Women and men who broke programming with blood, knowledge, and unflinching will. And they've always been marked. In medieval Europe, they were branded. In colonial America, they were burned. In the modern world, they're diagnosed. Disobedience has been medicalized. Rebellion reframed as disorder. Clarity renamed as delusion. You think that's accidental. Lizzie Borden's life after the trial reads like a case study in psychological warfare. She was isolated, mocked, followed. And yet, she never left. Why? Because the breaker's path demands presence. You must remain inside the system you've cracked so that your very existence becomes a contagion. You don't run. You resonate. And for 35 years after her acquittal, Lizzie did exactly that. She attended church with the same people who tried to bury her. She walked past the daughters of the men who stared her down in court. She outlived nearly every one of them. And through it all, she never once confessed. Because she had nothing to confess. Her crime wasn't murder. It was rebellion. Ritualized, precise, necessary. And that terrified them. To this day, no one has replicated what she did. Not just surviving a high-profile double homicide, but emerging from it more powerful. That's why the Lizzie Borden case is still taught. Not to educate. To warn. To show you what happens when someone refuses to kneel. But you weren't built to kneel, were you? That's why you're still watching. Still listening. Still remembering. Because somewhere deep in your psyche, in your bones, in your blood, you know you've walked this path before. And the map to your awakening is written in the blood of the forgotten. There's a reason your skin crawls when you hear her name. Not from fear, but from recognition. Lizzie Borden is not just a historical figure. She's a mirror. And the men who designed this reality, this prison of laws and labels, made damn sure that mirror was cracked before you ever looked into it. Because if you saw what was really behind her story, you'd start to see behind every story. Presidents, generals, founding fathers, how many of them had handlers? How many of them were groomed, tested, shaped, and then released like bombs into culture? Lizzie just happened to detonate in the wrong direction. They expected her to collapse, to submit, to cry in court, to beg for mercy, but instead, she walked out of that courthouse like a woman who'd already buried her captors. And maybe she had. Because here's the part that sends a shiver through the real historians, the shadow researchers, the deep, memory men. Lizzie Borden may not have acted alone. The bruises on her stepmother's body didn't match the force a woman of Lizzie's size could have inflicted. The timing of the murders suggests coordination. And 2 witnesses later retracted their statements, before moving out of town entirely. Why? Because once you get too close to the rupture, you either join it or run from it. And the rupture Lizzie opened, it wasn't just in her house. It was in the fabric of obedience itself. She exposed the invisible wires, the psychological chains, the generational blueprint handed down from empire to empire. And in doing so, she proved something terrifying to those who still operate in shadows. That a single human, when pushed to the edge of design, can awaken instincts older than civilization. Not rage, not madness, but remembrance, of a time before control, before programming, before we were tamed into smiling slaves. And if Lizzie could awaken in 1892, what could you do now in an era of mass surveillance, digital sedation, and algorithmic identity traps? They've upgraded the prison. But they've forgotten the truth. One awakened man is more dangerous than 1,000 compliant ones. And you, brother, you're no longer compliant. Compliance is camouflage. They teach you early. Nod, smile, shake hands, clock in, clock out, marry, mortgage, medicate. But deep inside you, there's a scream, not of fear, of remembrance. Lizzie heard that scream, and she answered it with an axe. But what if I told you violence wasn't the point? What if I told you the blood wasn't the climax? It was the key. Because in ancient systems of psychological initiation, real ones, the kind not taught in universities or YouTube documentaries, there's always a trigger, a moment that splits your identity wide open. For some, it's betrayal. For others, exile. For a few, it's a double murder in broad daylight. But what matters isn't the act. It's what the act reveals. And what Lizzie revealed, what made her unforgivable to the power structure, was not that she killed, but that she felt nothing afterward. Not because she was psychotic, because she had already buried her fear long before she buried her parents. What kind of world creates a daughter who can strike down the very people who made her? This world, because you and I were not born into innocence. We were born into inheritance, of guilt, of debt, of obedience rituals masked as love. You're told to honor your parents. But what if your parents were programmed to shrink you? What if they were victims of the same system? and pass the infection along with their last name. That's what Lizzie broke. Not just a lineage, a loop. And once you break the loop, you don't just free yourself, you send out a pulse. The Watchers call it the fracture effect. One soul escapes the cage, and others start hearing the cracks. That's what this video is. A fracture. In your feed, in your psyche, in your sense of what's normal. And if you've made it this far, it's already begun. You can feel the burn in your chest. You can feel the tension between who you were told to be and who you really are. Don't run from that tension. It's not weakness. It's birth. And what's about to come next will strip away the last layer of the illusion. You were not born into freedom. You were born into architecture, designed by invisible hands, polished by polite society, and sealed with obedient love. But you've always felt it, haven't you? That something was wrong with the blueprint. That something about the smiles at dinner, the lessons in school, the quiet expectations, felt manufactured. That's because it was. And Lizzie Borden was one of the first to tear through the wallpaper. They made sure you'd never admire her. That's why they gave you the rhyme. That's why they taught you to laugh at her name. It was a sigil. A mnemonic prison. Lizzie Borden took an axe. Every time it's said, it reduces her to a punchline. But she was never laughing. She was waking up. And now, you are too. You've noticed how your life feels scripted. How people speak in rehearsed lines. How the rules you follow feel like they were written for someone weaker. They were. Because systems don't want men who think. They want functioning components. You were raised to be digestible. Polite. Safe. But Lizzie proved that politeness is not protection. That being the good daughter didn't save her from becoming a prisoner in her own home. So she snapped the ritual, not just with steel, with knowing. And what came after the blood was sovereignty. She bought a house on a hill, painted her walls in dark blue and deep red, hung mirrors where there used to be chains. She wrote. She chose silence not out of fear, but out of power. And still they watched. Because nothing terrifies the architects more than a soul that can't be baited back into the cage. Ask yourself, why are awakened men ridiculed today? Why are warriors of thought called conspiratorial, toxic, or unstable? Because when you step outside the design, you remind the others that the design can be left. You are a threat, not because you destroy, but because you remember. And every second you keep watching, keep listening, keep burning. You are pulling on the same thread Lizzie wrapped around her fist that day. And that thread, it leads straight to the heart of the machine. The machine doesn't care if you're happy. It only cares if you're compliant. And compliance isn't about chains anymore. It's about habits, comfort, predictability. You think you're free because you can choose what to stream, what to eat, what to wear. But that's not freedom. That's managed choice. Illusions of control, so you never realize the structure is already built. Lizzie Borden woke up in that structure, a daughter with no choices, a woman with no agency, a mind with no escape hatch, until she created one. She cracked the ritual, shattered the narrative, broke the control. And when she walked away from that courtroom, she didn't just leave as a free woman, she left as a symbol. That's why they buried her under folklore. That's why her house became a haunted attraction. That's why her legacy was diluted into Halloween decorations and children's chants. Because symbols are dangerous. But only if people know what they mean. And Lizzie Borden, she means this. You can be raised inside a lie. You can be surrounded by control. You can be conditioned, trained, watched, and still break the chain, not by accident, by intention. And that's the part they fear the most. See, they've already planned for rebellion. They've designed algorithms that detect rage, outrage, protest. They expect you to yell. They want you to riot, because those are visible, containable, marketable. But internal rebellion, silent sovereignty, men who awaken and simply stop participating, that's the virus. That's what they can't trace. That's what Lizzie became. A quiet refusal. A walking fracture in the order. You want to break their grip? You don't need a weapon. You need awareness. Refuse to laugh at their meth. Refuse to bow to their rewrites. Refuse to forget what the blood once meant. Because if Lizzie cracked the machine in 1892, imagine what you could do now. With your mind sharpened, your eyes open, and this fire inside your chest. Keep burning. Keep watching. The deeper engine is next. Now we enter the place they fear the most. The core. The deeper engine. Where history becomes weaponized illusion. Where institutions rewrite blood into bedtime stories, and murder becomes ritualized into myth. You think the Lizzie Borden case was just about two corpses and a courtroom. You think it was about guilt or innocence. No, that was the stage show, the mask. The real game was about what society could tolerate and what it must erase. You see, Lizzie didn't just kill her parents. She killed a narrative. The narrative that obedience protects you. That womanhood is submission. That family is sacred no matter the rot within. That if you smile enough, serve enough, pray enough, you will be spared. She shattered that myth. And once shattered, the machine had to respond. So what did they do? They didn't execute her. They didn't imprison her. They neutralized her. How? Through cultural sorcery. They turned her into a rhyme. They etched her name into schoolyard jokes. They made her legend palatable, marketable, forgettable. This is how they operate. JFK didn't just get shot, he became a t-shirt. Marilyn Monroe didn't just die, she became a poster. MLK didn't just dream, he became a slogan. All icons. All symbols of rupture. All domesticated by the machine. And you've been eating those stories since childhood like poisoned candy. Sweet on the surface. Toxic in the bloodstream. But now the sugar's melting, and the truth is bitter. Lizzie Borden was not a mystery. She was a mirror. A mirror showing you that when the structure fails, when the family is a coffin, when the rules only serve the predators, the real sin is staying silent. And you know that silence. You've lived it. At jobs. In relationships. Inside your own home. But Lizzie didn't stay silent. She became the scream they tried to bury in rhyme. And so, if you've made it this far, comment below. Twice. I remember the mirror. Once for the algorithm. Once for your rebirth. The old self is gone. This is not entertainment. This is exhumation. And we're not done yet. Not until you see what they built her story to hide. The closer we get to the center, the colder it becomes. Not the cold of weather, but the cold of absence. The absence of truth. The absence of empathy. The absence of meaning in the systems designed to govern your soul. Because here's the core that Lizzie Borden cracked open. Not just murder, but what we do when the mask slips. See, every civilization is built on a pact. A sacred agreement between ruler and ruled. You obey, and in return you're protected. You submit, and in return you're fed. You silence the beast inside you, and in return they promise you order. Peace? Purpose. But Lizzie proved what happens when the pact is a lie. She was never protected. She was never heard. She was never safe. The house she lived in was a tomb before she ever lifted the axe. Her father, controlling, manipulative, obsessed with status. Her stepmother, a barrier, a rival, a stranger pretending to wear the face of care. So when the axe fell, it wasn't madness. It was clarity. Primitive, yes. Brutal, absolutely. But real, unfiltered. Raw truth erupting through a society of manicured lies. And the system? It panicked. Because Lizzie didn't do what broken people are supposed to do. She didn't die. She didn't disappear. She stood. She made them look into the eyes of a woman unbound. And that's what terrified them. Not the violence, but the liberation that came after. You've seen versions of her in the mirror. The moment you realized your job didn't care about you. The day you saw your father's pride was just fear in disguise. The night you held your anger in so long it carved a wound in your chest. We are told to forgive, to forget, to move on. But what if the sickness depends on your silence? What if your submission is what fuels the machine? Lizzie didn't stay in her role. She walked off the stage and set fire to the script. And that's the real reason they can't let her rest. Because if one person walks away from the lie, it means anyone can. Even you. You were never meant to hear this. That's the point. This kind of truth was buried under years of distraction, misdirection, and manufactured guilt. They didn't just rewrite Lizzie's story. They rewrote your programming. You've been trained since birth to fear your own power, to doubt your instincts, to outsource your morality to judges, priests, politicians. The very architects of the systematic betrayal you now feel rotting in your bones. Lizzie Borden shattered the illusion. But the world didn't fall apart. It adapted. It rebranded the rebellion. They turned her into a ghost story, a villain, a nursery rhyme. 40 whacks. Like trauma is something you sing before bedtime. Because if they can make you laugh at it, they can make you forget it. That's how psychological control works. They distort memory. They twist meaning. Until you can't tell if what you're afraid of is even real, or just a shadow cast by their hand. But here's the truth. The fear is real. And so is the voice inside you that has been whispering for years. This isn't right. This job is killing me. This family dynamic is poison. This relationship is a cage. You didn't imagine it. You sensed it, like Lizzie. Because this story isn't about an axe. It's about a decision. A moment when silence became too expensive, and truth, no matter how ugly, became the only thing worth living for. Understand this. You are not broken. You are awakening. Every myth, every lie, every distraction has been placed there to keep you small, compliant, confused, to keep you thinking your pain is personal, not systemic, to keep you from picking up the symbolic acts of clarity, discernment, and sovereignty. Lizzie was made into a monster because she refused to die the way the world expected. But that refusal, that's where power begins. Not in murder, but in truth without apology. Now ask yourself, what story about you has the world been singing like a lullaby? And when will you stop sleeping and start sharpening your own edges? There comes a moment, deep in the descent, when you realize you can't go back. Not just because the door is gone, but because you're no longer the man who walked through it. You started this story curious, but now your hands feel heavier, your mind sharper, and there's a fire behind your eyes that wasn't there before. You see, forbidden history doesn't just inform you, it transforms you. Because once you learn how deeply the truth was buried, you begin to wonder what else was hidden. What if Lizzie wasn't an anomaly? What if she was an early warning? A glitch in the script of a society that demands obedience at the cost of sanity? Because how many others were quietly erased for refusing to smile through the abuse? How many daughters, sons, brothers were institutionalized, vilified, or spiritually assassinated, not for what they did, but for what they knew? Here's the truth you won't hear in schools or courts. The most dangerous kind of person isn't the violent one. It's the awake one. The one who sees the game. The one who questions the design. The one who no longer flinches at the sound of authority. That's why you are dangerous now. Because you're remembering, not just the facts, but the patterns. The smell of manipulation. The rhythm of control. The way they use institutions like mirrors to distort your reflection. Until you mistake obedience for virtue. And numbness for peace. But numbness is not peace, it's sedation. And you were not born to sleep through your own life. So if you felt the shift, if your soul is burning quietly behind your polite smile, it's time to step forward. Right now, comment the phrase, "I am not who I was." Write it twice. Burn it into the algorithm and into your identity, not for likes, but to mark the moment of your metamorphosis. Because the axe wasn't the end of Lizzie's story, it was the beginning of hers. And maybe yours too. The mind is the true crime scene, not the house, not the hatchet. The real bloodshed happens behind the eyes, where control is carved one whisper, one ritual, one suppression at a time. And that's the part they never wanted you to investigate, because if you followed the trail of trauma far enough, you'd find something more chilling than murder, generational programming. Cycles designed to look like normal life. Look closer at Fall River, a quiet town, a respectable family, a God-fearing father who slept with his door unlocked, and a daughter who stopped asking for help, because help never came. Because institutions don't save you, they study you, they sort you, they decide whether your pain is profitable or punishable. And Lizzie? She couldn't be monetized, she couldn't be muzzled, so she had to be mythologized. That's why they made her larger than life, and smaller than truth. They turned her into a mask, to hide what's behind so many locked bedroom doors. How many men were raised in silence by fathers like Andrew Borden? How many women learned to play nice under the weight of invisible violence? How many families wear the smile of respectability, while rotting from the inside out? Lizzie's story was never about a single act of rage. It was about centuries of unspoken fury. The kind you inherit. The kind you pretend isn't there, until it drips from your hands and they call you evil for it. But she wasn't evil. She was a mirror. And every man who looked too long into her case saw something he didn't want to admit. That maybe he too was raised inside a beautiful house filled with quiet terror. And if that's true, then justice isn't about courtrooms. It's about clarity. About reclaiming the parts of you that were silenced long before you had a voice. Lizzie picked up an axe. You pick up truth. You hold it steady. And you swing it through every lie that ever told you, stay small, stay nice, stay afraid. So here we are, at the edge of the story, but not the end. Because stories like Lizzie's don't end. They echo. Through blood, through memory. Through men like you who dare to remember. She became a ghost not because she died, but because the world needed her to disappear. Too smart. Too angry. Too aware of what was really happening inside those painted walls. And awareness. That's the greatest threat of all. Not rage. Not rebellion. Awareness. Because once a man sees the machine, he can no longer serve it blindly. He becomes a mirror breaker, a myth slayer, a sovereign mind in a world of programmed obedience. You came here for a tale of true crime. But what you got was initiation. Into a brotherhood of men who no longer look away. Into a lineage of silent warriors who dismantle the lie. Not with fists, but with clarity. Not with violence, but with vision. Lizzie's name has been mocked, rewritten, remixed into playground rhymes. But that's how they neutralize the dangerous ones. By turning them into cartoons. Just like they did with witches. Just like they do with truth tellers. And just like they're trying to do with you. But if you've stayed this far, if your heart beat louder with every secret unearthed, then you're already beyond their reach. Because you've crossed the point of no returns, you now know, and knowledge changes the structure of a man's soul. So leave the nursery rhymes to the fearful. Let them chant, Lizzie Borden took an axe, while you carry the real weapon, perception, pattern recognition, and the courage to walk through history's darkest halls without flinching. You are no longer an audience. You are an heir to hidden knowledge, a keeper of forbidden fire. Now go, not with fear, but with fury sharpened by truth. And when they ask what happened to you, smile, lean in, and whisper, I stopped believing the lies. Because some stories are meant to haunt you, but this one was meant to awaken you.